Okay. Everyone hear me? See some see some thumbs. I see some head nods. Okay, we're rolling. Thank you everyone for coming and joining us. My name is Shantae Bryant, and I'm the administrative assistant for Folger Education. And today we are joined by Dr. Peggy O'Brien, Dr. Adam Zucker. We are in for a real treat this evening, folks, or afternoon or morning. Time zones are welcome here. We love you all. Dr. Zucker will be sharing his presentation with us, Macbeth Without Ambition, and then we will have some time for questions. Just to do some housekeeping, this meeting, as you know, is being recorded, and this is a teacher member exclusive, so it will be up on Folger Teaching tomorrow. And for the certificates, which you will receive by me, will be emailed in about 5 to 7 business days. During this presentation, the chat box will be turned off, but near the end, it will be turned on so you guys can drop in your questions and comments. So I hope you guys enjoy. Now I will turn this over to Peggy.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Glad to see you guys. I'm always, you guys taught all day and it's 8 o'clock at night on the East Coast. And even if you're on the West Coast and Holland Henderson, I'm looking at you and you're in Hawaii. And so you're in a whole other universe. So thanks for coming for this little provocative blast. We love this because it'll be kind of a provocative blast, and don't we need that? I want to say a few things first. These are things I always say, but they are really important, I think, and so I'm going to keep saying them. One is the importance of people who teach high school. If you teach high school, you know already that you are doing the most important work on earth, and that is in a regular year. What you're doing this year is like miraculous every day. And so if you are part of this group tonight, we love having you. And if you're not a high school teacher, we want you to know that you're in the finest company you could be in. Also to say the importance of scholarship to high school teachers, something that we as teachers don't have enough chances at is like some deep dives into scholarship and to what scholars are thinking about these plays, which a lot of us teach a lot. Some plays we teach every year. And so when folks like Adam Zucker come along to share their thoughts, that expands our knowledge and it gives us new ways to look at old plays. And we want our students to figure out their own ways to look at old plays. And so inviting these conversations to take place is important to us so that scholarship and skills and all that can keep going and keep getting to high school students. And Shantae already told you logistically what's going to happen. She's way ahead of me all the time in terms of the chat box and all that. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about Adam. I'm going to tell you all the regular stuff, and then I'm going to tell you the juicy part at the end. So Adam Zucker has been a member of the English department at UMass Amherst since 2004, and his area of expertise is 16th and 17th century English literature with a special focus on Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, and their contemporaries. He has written books, The Places of Wit in Early Modern English Comedy, published in 2011 by Cambridge University Press, and he's the co-editor of Historical Effects in the Early Modern Theater, 2015, and Localizing Caroline Drama, Politics and Economics of the Early Modern English Stage from 1625 to 1642. He has written articles galore. His current book project is a study of stupidity and incompetence in the plays of Shakespeare and in early modern English culture more generally. So if you want to put the topic of his current book project, Stupidity and Incompetence in Shakespeare, and the title of his first book, The Places of Wit in Early Modern English Comedy, then that will tell you one thing is that Adam Zucker has a fabulous sense of humor. He teaches the department Shakespeare lecture. He teaches a junior writing course on Tudor and Stuart lyric poetry, teaches an undergraduate research seminar, teaches all kinds of really interesting stuff. He received the College of Humanities and Fine Arts Outstanding Teacher Award a few years ago. So he is clearly an accomplished Shakespearean in every way, but Adam Zucker's real claim to fame is that he was a resident scholar at the Folger's Teaching Shakespeare Institute, the last pre-COVID one in 2018. And there he mixed it up with 25 school teachers and a faculty of 10. We learned loads from him, and we learned later from him that he learned plenty himself. He wrote me a note not so long ago and said it was, quote, one of the most important and definitive experiences of my career. we love Adam Zucker and we love this lecture. So he gave a version of this lecture in the summer of 2018, and it shook so many of us up so much that A, we remember it really clearly, and B, we asked him to reprise bits of it here for you and for us again too. So with great honor and affection, Adam Zucker.
Thank you, Peggy, for that introduction. Thank you, Shantae, for putting this together, to the whole Folger Education team for keeping this going in this manner. Thanks to you also, people who are here. You've had a whole day already, possibly doing this, staring at your screen in little grid boxes all day long. I'm honestly touched that you're here to keep listening and keep learning. And yeah, like Peggy said, working at the Shakespeare Institute a couple summers ago put something into my heart as a teacher. And so I'm really delighted to be back and sharing some of this work with you. I'm going to give you the title of the talk gives part of it away, right? I'm going to be talking about a few ways to think about Macbeth, setting the ambition reading aside. I'm going to be talking about reasons why we might want to, but I'm also going to be using the Folger's collections to talk about Macbeth sort of as a process over time, and to give you a little sense for how that ambition reading came into being as a response to Macbeth. It wasn't something that was always naturally a part of this play, built up over time and has become a handhold, kind of an interesting handhold for this play in various ways. Okay, I'm also going to share my screen. The most tense moment of every Zoom presentation. Here it is. Let's see if it works. It worked. We have thumbs up. Delightful. You can see one of my many strange Macbeth images. The Macbeth images you're going to see in this talk are all taken from, oh, not all. There are a couple that come off of the scholar's friend, google.com, but many of them come from Folger's Luna image collection, which I hope you're using in your own teaching. It's such a great resource to throw your students into exploring what Shakespeare meant at various moments through these images. I've also got a quotation from a recent article that some of you may have read in the Atlantic Monthly called Private School. I can't see my entire slide owing to the fact that we are all on it together. Private schools have become truly obscene. The 7th grader says Macbeth is weird, my department chair told me once. A teacher is writing this article. The 12th grader says Macbeth is ambitious. Once students could make discernments like that, it was time for college. This talk is going to be about why that's backwards. Macbeth is a very, very dark play. Oh, I'm going to start my timer so that I don't go on for too long. Wish me luck. I think it'll be a half an hour. Macbeth is a very dark play. At its center, there's a terrifying character. Macbeth knows the personal cost of strict decorum, politeness, civility in his own world. He decides to abandon all of that. His decisions to listen to mysterious soothsayers, his decision to murder his king, his decision to murder his good friend, his decision to murder his good friend's son, his other good friend's wife, and several small children. These are uncivil decisions. Politics in Macbeth loses politeness entirely. It's kind of a terrifying scene. Lest we think that the world has no use at all for civility anymore, and sometimes it can seem like it doesn't. Macbeth, the play, shows us one version of what can happen when civil society falls apart entirely. We confront it truthfully. And it's hard to see Macbeth for the first time again. If you try, this is a bit too much to handle. I always try to put myself in the mind of a student seeing this for the first time. Even in a classroom, this tidal wave of evil in this play, it can and possibly should be quite difficult for students to handle. we tend to block out or mediate this nihilistic terror with moralizing interpretations. In a fairly straightforward way, the large story of Macbeth does not need to be interpreted. He is awful. Don't do those things. That's the story of Macbeth. That's sort of like the basic message of Macbeth. In fact, it's one of the basic messages of Renaissance tragedy in its moment. So it's a warning for kings, rulers, don't do these things. Don't be like this. There's not that much ambiguity on some level about what's being shown to us here. But for a lot of reasons, many of them good, by the way, we do interpret this thing that in some way either A, could be uninterpretable, or B, might not need to be interpreted. We read this play for some kind of meaning. As teachers, we often feel like we need to guide our students through the torrent of violence and horror in this play, if we can still feel it ourselves, after teaching Macbeth for the 3,000th time, perhaps. And of course, the single most, common, olden, familiar handhold that we often give to our students is that this tragic hero has a flaw, a tragic flaw. He's ambitious, too ambitious. When I teach this play at UMass, which I don't do all that often, to be honest, because I'm kind of scared of it, but when I do, I actually spend the first day of every class discussion saying, hello, we're working on Macbeth, and there is one rule. You may not say the word ambition or talk about ambition while we talk this over. Why? Mainly because this has been the sort of the thing that for whatever reason sticks with them. It stays with them. I think we want our students to be ambitious. I think we would like them to have that quality in and of themselves. So I'm going to suggest that we divorce that sort of better idea from the outcome of this play. And the play guides us to do this as well, as you'll see. So instead of asking my students to stick with the thing they know, I want them to see Macbeth as a process in time, as something that changes over time, and that's something that they themselves are involved in the process of. Not as the receivers of the message of Macbeth, not as the people who will now learn about why ambition is a problem, because again, I don't think ambition itself is a problem. I want them to see that Macbeth changes with them and with us. I do that in part. The second most suspenseful part is the first time you change your slide, and it worked. I do that in part by showing them how Macbeth changes through history in using images like these from the Luna collection. Garrick in the mid 18th century, the great sort of canonizer of Shakespeare in England, turning him into the Swan of Avon and the national poet, looking like a guy in Hamilton. That's how I always think of that costume. You have a kind of Greco-Roman, later 18th century Macbeth. These are all images of actors doing their Macbeth thing. This great one, Kemble, one of the great 19th century Shakespearean actors, in his Macbeth outfit, and Sir Walter Scott tells a great story about this Macbeth. Many years afterwards, this is Scott talking about an encounter with Kemble. He was delighted when with our critical hands we divested his bonnet of sundry huge bunches of black feathers, which made it look like an undertaker's cushion. He told us afterward the change was worth to him 3 distinct rounds of applause. There's like the weird comic campy Macbeth in history as well, with a bunch of misplaced feathers all over him. Oops. There's the Folger reading room oil painting, which looms over scholars. It's not relaxing in there. Although I guess maybe with the renovation, it's going to lighten up in some way. I don't know. We'll see how it all comes out. And there's a Viking kind of Macbeth-y looking guy. And then we have the Game of Thrones moment that's happening now. Right. Macbeth is a process. You can see it in these pictures. Macbeth is always happening, always changing. And these things, these moments, keep the Shakespearean event useful for all of us in different ways. Keeping things in motion keeps Shakespeare useful. A lot of people talk about, well, is Shakespeare universal? Is Shakespeare something for all time and all people? I don't think that's actually the right question to ask about Shakespeare. I'm much more interested in how do we make Shakespeare useful? Is it? It won't be always. He won't always be, but still can be. Shakespeare gets used in classrooms. You, I hope, are using Shakespeare in the theater, in our minds, in all kinds of ways that express multiplicity and transitionality in history. It's a relief sometimes when things are rough in a given political historical moment. Looking at that changing Shakespeare actually, to me, it's kind of hopeful. This Fassbender guy does not look all that hopeful, and Macbeth is not a hopeful play. But the idea of that transition through time and with a work of art that becomes something else to other people, that gets used. It's not always good the way Shakespeare gets used over time. It's not always perfect, but that possibility is there. And that is one thing I think we can do for our students as they encounter the Shakespearean text, is to help them see it's not just about this one thing. It's about process. And it's about your encounter and your place in that process, our place as a room of teacher and students. Cliché works against this process. When bits and pieces of Shakespeare become cliched, too familiar, we become trapped in mazes of common knowledge, in systems of understanding that might blind us to all kinds of things, including, in the case of Macbeth, some of the more uncomfortable feelings that this play can call up, which I think are an important part of what it is. Shakespearean cliché, there are a lot of them. We are familiar with this one. To thine own self be true. A genius named Shakespeare wrote that. The context of to thine own self be true is this yammering speech by Polonius, where he's going on and on and on telling Laertes what to do and how to feel, blah, 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 right? The joke of this scene is that line. I've just told you everything you need to do. Make sure you are true to yourself. It's a self-defeating statement always. We lose the sort of complexity of the statement. It's a paradox. As soon as you tell someone, you better be true to yourself, if they listen to you, they're not on some level. Okay, there's one. We know this one. The balcony scene. Inevitable. It's the balcony scene. The truth is, the word balcony was completely unknown in Shakespeare's time. The architectural feature did not exist. There was a ledge called a terrace on the stage. The text of Romeo and Juliet calls this the window scene, or window scene. And there's actually 40 years after, 35 years after Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet, this is the first reference to a balcony in English in London in a play. It's a conversation between two characters in a delightful play called The Weeding of Covent Garden, about the building of the Covent Garden Plaza in London, which you may have been to watch people juggling or to go see a play. I would like to travel again someday. If you haven't gone, this is a good Shakespearean trip to take. And you can see in the conversation between these two characters, the character, that's short for Cockbrain, by the way, as if cock wasn't bad enough, his actual name is Cockbrain. Cockbrain says, oh, there's a lady standing up there on her balcony. Oh my God, I can't believe she's up there. The other character says, her balcony, what is that? I don't see her balcony. I can see her whole body, but I don't see a balcony. And there's a body joke about her body in the lines that follow. Character has to explain, no, that thing she's standing on, that's called a balcony. It just wasn't a known concept in English when Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet. Again, a world of weirdness in Shakespeare's play, in our reaction to it. This is all we think of, but this is there, right? The image of the cliche is so powerful that we can't even think of Romeo and Juliet without that scene. Macbeth has its own share, which I kind of like. The doubling, bubbling witches. Here are two good ones. I can't tell whether this is a generationally appropriate. Shantae, could you nod if you know who those two people are? You do. Okay, all right. So we're still in the I can see Shantae, I can't see everybody else. We're still in the world where that makes sense. The witches are insane, and we'll talk a little bit more about them over the course of this talk. The double, boil and trouble, etc. cliche, I can't even say it out loud properly, has turned them into something else. It is hard when you first encounter the witches in this play to see them anything other than, especially their first time through, oh, those people who say double, toil and trouble, right there they are. This is one of the eeriest scenes Shakespeare ever wrote. And a lot of original cartoonists think that it's a good joke about a dog, right? We're losing, it's inevitable. This is what happens when something becomes culturally central and inevitable, like Macbeth, like Shakespeare. But it distances us from, this one is particularly, when I see these, I'm like, great, it's great that so many people love Shakespeare this much. That this person, I forgot the name of this person, can do these cartoons and everybody kind of gets it, kind of. At the same time, this is a weird amalgamation of two moments in Macbeth. On the one hand, Lady Macbeth in her trance, sleepwalking. Oh, I'm sorry, Macbeth cleaning himself. And on the other end of it, Macbeth's out brief candle. The line isn't out, damn spot. It's out, damn spot. Out, brief candle. You're getting the idea here. This is not just a pop culture situation. Responses to the original text of Macbeth, which was printed for the first and only time in the folio of 1623. This is one of those plays that if the good folks who put together that collected folio works hadn't put it together, we wouldn't have Macbeth, maybe, right? This is the only place it was printed during Shakespeare's lifetime. You see here in this original spelling, in this moment where we're getting the letter from Macbeth, who's describing what happened, these wayward sisters saluted me. He describes the witches. The Folger edition of the play, like every other pretty much modern edition of the play, modernizes that word to weird, the weird sisters. Weird is a good word in Shakespeare's day, in part because it connects to this sense of waywardness, of off the trackness, of not just eerie, out of time, but also out of place. I've shown you the title of Ayanna Thompson and Scott Newstock's great collection about race and Macbeth, where they go back to this original spelling, hook the play into the spirit of this word. But when things get modernized, when editors, for lots of good reasons, take this language and put it into terms we understand, I want to like recapture the waywardness of weirdness in this play. And it can be hard to see as people do their work to Macbeth. Okay, part of this clichéing modernization of the text of Macbeth is, of course, this ambition trope. And I understand there are many reasons why one needs handholds in a classroom to present a text like this one. I'm going to suggest that 3 million results on Google are enough. I'm a little jealous of Dr. Aiden, PhD in Shakespeare, and his YouTube channel. I didn't click on that, but it might be a side business that I can go into. But this just goes on and on and on. It's actually, by the way, according to Dr. Aiden, it's the 3rd key theme in Macbeth. And one can only wonder what the other ones. That said, the fact that it plays such a huge role in our educational experience of this, I was taught the play this way. I'm guessing you might have been as well. The word ambition only appears twice in the play, and only in the first act of the play. The first time is here in the first chunk. I'm giving you a taste of the folio printing. I hope you all have your Folger Shakespeare Library editions. Wait. Of course, I have it right by me. This is the first section is where Lady Macbeth is sort of speaking out loud about Macbeth. You know this well. Thou wouldst be great, art not without ambition, but without the illness should attend it. It's not quite that Macbeth is saying that he has ambition here. It's his wife saying, well, you're a little bit ambitious, I guess. You're just not mean enough to do what needs to be done. And this is one of those moments in the play where I hate this. Illness does not have to attend ambition. This is one vision of how ambition might work. Macbeth himself, the one time he mentions the word, offers a much more ambiguous kind of relationship to it. He's sort of speaking to himself, thinking whether or not, what has he done? How is it going to proceed? What's it all mean? I have no spur, he says, to prick the sides of my intent, that is to like make the horse of my intent go faster, but only vaulting ambition which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other. No one really knows what that means. You will see in edition after edition all these attempts to kind of massage these words to make them make more sense. This is a strange moment, an unclear moment. And these are the only two. From this point on, nobody says the word again. Nobody reflects on, oops, I was too ambitious. No, it's gone. It's just this first act and then these 2 moments. We are actually lucky to have some very early responses to Macbeth recorded, or one in particular. It's one of the few plays where this guy, Simon Foreman, who was a play-going crazy person who kept a very elaborate diary during Shakespeare's day, he actually recorded exactly, he used to see plays and then say, here are the important things about the play that I want to remember. I highlighted his crazy spellings because I enjoy them. They're defamiliarizing. They're very strange. There's more of this like weirdness that begins to accrue to Macbeth as this guy says, I saw Macbeth April 20th at the Globe. And this is what I'd like to remember. Macbeth and Banquo riding through the woods, 3 fairies or nymphs saluted Macbeth. You see the plot of the play here. You see the things that he wants to remember. Macbeth contrived to kill Dumpkin. I suggest you call him Dumpkin when you teach this play. And through the persuasion of his wife, she's there, did murder the king, etc. Nothing about ambition. Didn't occur to him. We likewise have other tellings of the story of Macbeth in other places, in addition to the source that Shakespeare used, which is Holinshed's Chronicles. We have William Slater's terrible verse history of England that discusses Macbeth. He calls him Tyrant Macbeth, a word that gets applied to Macbeth several times over the course of this play, word that I'm going to come back to a little bit later. This seems to be the repeated idea that Slater is interested in. tyrant is a ruler with absolute power, whose personal emotions and personal passions far exceed the health of the Commonwealth, far exceed his duty to take care of the country as a whole. A tyrant's personal passions dominate governance. This is what Slater was interested in the story of Macbeth. Whether or not he'd actually seen Shakespeare's play, we don't know. So that's another early no ambition myth. It's not until 1650 that you start to get a telling of this story that pretty explicitly says, and here you can see in the highlighted portion that I've got for you here, Donald was a good-natured prince, etc., destroyed a Danish army, good for him, but at last being ensnared by his kinsman Macbeth, who was pricked forward by ambition and a former vision of three women of a sour human shape, etc. And you get the story there. This, in 1650, is the first record that I could find of someone telling this story, attributing ambition to Macbeth himself. This is about 45 years after Shakespeare wrote the play. And from this point, a ball starts rolling down the hill. It gets very extreme in the next text I'm going to show you. It's actually the last text I'm going to show you. Yes, we'll have time for conversation. I still have more to say, but I'm going to move on to the last one. And this is, what I'm about to show you is William Davenant's 1674 rewriting of Macbeth, or like growing of Macbeth. There was a whole pattern in the 1670s, about 90 years after, 60, 70 years after Shakespeare stopped writing, of restaging Shakespeare's plays, but adapting them to better suit the tastes and the aesthetic rules of that moment. This meant that King Lear was rewritten to have a happy ending. This meant that whole plots of Love's Labour's Lost got dropped out and just the gallant men were talked about. The pedant part disappeared. These revised versions of Shakespeare's plays actually became, in some instances, the standard versions of the plays performed. People didn't want to see Lear die until the end of the 19th century. They watched Nahum Tate's revision of that play for centuries afterwards. Davenant's Macbeth was similarly one of these intensely popular revisions. And what Davenant did was add dialogue that kind of added what he thought was necessary background, debate, discussion between Macbeth and other characters that was missing. It's one of the weird things about Shakespeare's play is that that's not there. These are the things, these are the inspiring moments where our own imaginations and voices take over. Davenant was like, well, let me explain things. Macbeth, talking to Lady Macbeth, this is in Act 4. She's already like off stage and losing it in regular Macbeth. Can you think that a crime? She's like, Lady Macbeth says, oh my God, why did you do this all? You should resign the crown. This is what Lady Macbeth is saying to Macbeth. And Macbeth says, you told me to do it. Can you think that a crime which you did once provoke me to commit had not your breath blown my ambition up into a flame? Duncan had yet been living. You made me this ambitious. And Lady Macbeth, Davenant thinks she should say, you were a man, and by the charter of your sex, you should have governed me. There was more crime in you when you obeyed my counsels than I contracted by my giving it. This is like the debate one has with one's students. Well, should Macbeth have listened to his wife? Why is their relationship this way that he did? Davenant's like applies the standards of gendered dominance within a marriage where the man is supposed to be in charge and control the wife. And Lady Macbeth is like, you were supposed to be in charge of me. Why did you listen to me? This is, the ambition plot comes from the same place, or the ambition reading comes from the same place as that desire to explain the relationship between the two of them, such that Lady Macbeth's like, you were a very weak husband. That's not going to happen. These is another chunk that Davenant wrote. For Macbeth, he wrote last words for Macbeth. You remember, of course, that in actual Macbeth, Macbeth and Macduff fight off stage, and Macduff comes on with Macbeth head. Delightful head prop moment. Disgusting. Really disgusting. Again, like, really disgusting. That's a human head. Ugh. Ugh. Here, they have their final fight on stage. Fighting. Macbeth falls and Macduff vaunts over him. This for my royal master Duncan. This for my dearest friend, my wife. For those pledges of our loves, my children. Hark, I hear a noise. Sure, there are more reserves to conquer, and he runs off. Macbeth gets a last word. Farewell, vain world. And what's most vain in it? Ambition. And he dies. Now there is a message to Macbeth written into the dialogue. We don't have to do much work. Ah, yes, this is a play about ambition. Look, Macbeth is saying it right there. In this moment, in the Restoration, part of the aesthetic desires of these authors was to craft these coherent, moralizing ideas. This was a pretty novel situation in 1674. It is not so novel anymore. If you were to show this to your student, well, let me reframe that. If I were to show this to my students after they went through Macbeth training earlier, probably I showed this to them and they'd say, yes, that's right. This play is definitely about ambition. This 1674 idea is with us, remains with us. This is, I think, a kind of a robbing of the play on some level of an emptiness, of a weirdness. Other things that might take its place. I just have a couple of suggestions. I'm not going to go into great detail here because I don't want to be the next voice in your head telling you what to do. Actually, when I did this at the Shakespeare Institute, I had a discussion with the group who participated. We gave the scholar faculty would give a lecture, and then afterward we'd have seminars with smaller groups of the participants in the program. And so I was sitting with my group afterwards, and I said, okay, what would you guys do? Take out ambition. Let's just run through some more ideas. And one of my students, or one of the students, probably not fair to really say my students, had a brain like, oh, I think I want to teach this through the image of blood. Blood. I want to find a way to teach Macbeth and blood. And we were all at the table, and she pulled out her phone. They call them phones. And she texted her advisor, her mentor at her school, curriculum advisor. And she said, I'm thinking about reworking my Macbeth curriculum. Do you think it would be crazy to teach a segment on Macbeth and blood? And the curriculum advisor wrote back and said, well, that sounds a little difficult and maybe too much. Why don't you try ambition? That was the teaching advice she got. So you can see the situation we're in. So I like this idea of tyranny. If you look into the idea of tyranny in the early modern period, it's really a fascinating political concept, and one that gives you a way to talk about what's so horrifying about this play and locate it in an idea about governance and about political process that I think is active now. I mean, this is sort of part of the language of civic stuff in the United States, right? But the idea of tyrant has an emotional resonance that Shakespeare and so many other writers of tragedy grabbed onto. The violence and the weirdness of this play is in part about the terror of a political figure letting horrible personal desires be the primary driving force for governance. You know, we lived through a political moment recently where it seemed often like the desire of self was sort of one of the motivating factors for how our political universe was operating, and it can seem that way in better times as well. I like the language of manhood in this play as another site of horrifying terror. I'm just, again, throwing out possibilities. I'm not going to settle on one because I want the weirdness and the waywardness to sort of be the thing you walk away with as we get to the end of this talk and move into the moment where I'm hoping we can chat a little bit about the play and some of the ideas here. This play is full of uneasy, eerie difficulty. Ambition really doesn't have much to do with it, right? That idea can sanitize what is, I think, Shakespeare's truly strangest play. You can see in these images of the witches, you can see in Macduff's neck. This is another moment where you look at the Folger records and you think, what? I think that moment where you hit a Shakespearean artifact or experience and you say, huh, is a moment of possibility. Shakespeare is full of possibilities like that. Macbeth for children and the head prop, huh? How are we supposed to relate to a play that doesn't entail the shutting down of disgust, discomfort, doesn't entail the shutting down of the possibility of confusion and difficulty, and at the same time lets our students perhaps hold on to an idea of ambition so important that doesn't get spoiled by the image of a man like, oh God, I was ambitious and look what happened to me. It doesn't have to be that way, and this play doesn't have to be that way either. That is the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing, come back to this crew.
Take a minute. You must have a thought or a question or you want to talk back to this guy and tell him he's nuts or any one of those things. I would say what's really interesting to me is two big things. One is, and there are things that we talk about all the time here in my place where we live and work, is of course that there's more than one way to look at a play, right? And Adam's thinking about how these ways get invented over time. But the other is like reading what's there and paying attention to what's there and paying attention to what's not there. And there's a million reasons why that is really important. Whose stories are being told, whose stories are not being told. But yeah, I love the Folger did a production of Davenant's Macbeth a few years ago.
I know. The image there of the skeleton witches was actually from a Folger production as well.
Yeah, and it was Davenant's Macbeth is hardly ever produced now, and only a place like the Folger would do it, right? Because we're so weird about stuff, and it sold out in days because lots of people who do what you do, Adam, and also theater folks, like you never get to see it, and so people came from all over. It was really interesting.
Yeah, I am deeply sorry that I didn't get to see it, but
yeah,
there are these moments in production history for Shakespeare plays that dominate, these ideas that dominate for centuries, that seem crazy to us now, and that is certainly one of them.
Okay, so are you going to tell me that I know you guys taught a whole day and everything. Are you going to tell me you don't have any response to this? I know you do. Go ahead, whoever.
Hi, it's
Hey,
Brianna.
Brianne. Hi.
Hi. I was just wondering, I guess, like, what do you think is like a reading of Macbeth that's, or like any play, I guess, it's like developed, maybe especially Macbeth is like developing right now, that you see like going the same way of just kind of like becoming like barnacled and boring? Like, I don't know if that question makes sense, but do you feel
No.
like, yeah.
Well, there are few plays that are like Macbeth that are so, I mean, I don't know how many of you teach in school systems where Macbeth is actually an expected part of the English curriculum. It's a lot. It's one of those texts that just is like, well, of course you're doing Shakespeare and you're going to do Macbeth. I think that there are plays that are coming into themselves in novel ways, plays like Othello and plays, I don't think you can teach Titus Andronicus to high schoolers necessarily. Plays that are now, as our moment comes into being, those plays start speaking with a louder and louder voice. Weirdly, I think Macbeth could be one of those plays if we removed some of the barnacled, that's a good word for it, stuff that comes along with it. I think Macbeth is like a crucial politics play for our, or could be a crucial politics play for our moment, but it needs some reimagining. Other plays that are kind of getting locked into place, I mean, we still have a lot of Hamlet is about delay. Mike's, by the way, Mike's, I have a very particular experience. I'm teaching an introductory Shakespeare lecture at the University of Massachusetts. I cannot speak for the universe. I can only speak for a majority, like kind of conscientious Massachusetts public school crowd who come in and they are like, yeah, Hamlet is definitely about delay. And then I have to do the same thing. I was like, okay, let's chunk that off to the side and see if this play can be about anything else for you. And I have to work hard to make it be about some other thing. So Hamlet's another one, I guess. It's the big ones that sort of get ossified because I'm looking at a room full of teachers here who themselves are part of this history of educational process and educational conversation. And it sometimes can be hard to, I mean, I'm still deeply attached to the things I learned about Merchant of Venice and some of the other plays that my favorite teachers and professors taught me. And it can be hard to say, okay, maybe I'm going to be in this situation very, very, very soon where I'm going to say, maybe it's time for me to just completely rewrite these and see how the world will speak anew through these plays that I've done so many times before. Not easy. It's a big ask, I think.
Let's see. We have a couple questions. Rachel asks, can you speak to the concept of negative capability in relation to Macbeth? I would love you to explain to me what that is, Rachel. And is that a useful concept with students?
All right. Tell me how you want me to talk about that phrase. Are you there? There you are.
Rachel, tell them how you want them to talk about it.
Well, so the phrase, it's kind of living in these spaces where there isn't actually an answer. Being able to live in the spaces where the story is sort of presented, but it can't be reduced to, conceptually, like what you're talking about, ambition or things like that. And Keats said that was one of the keys to a great artist, is to be able to present this story, present these issues, and not provide you with the solution, which in many ways allows for many, many interpretations of the story and of the play.
Yeah.
And you can see a lot of, I've seen many, many productions, and how in one production they'll seize on this idea of the children and killing the children and killing off the next generation, or one that is just completely suffused in blood, or I could go on. So
yeah. I think that there's always a balance as teachers between telling your students there is no answer and anything goes, and telling your students, like, you are having a response to this play that is grounded in something, and I want you to work through that experience in a way that helps you speak out with this play and back to the play. I think a lot of, that's another thing that a lot of English majors come in, they're like, there is no truth, there is no right and wrong. I'm like, actually there is, there are like structured realities that we are dealing with in our own world that are real and are not nothing. Art gives us a chance to encounter that fine line between the unanswerable and the thing that's clearly right in front of us. The student and the teacher together in conversation, I think can understand the ability of a work of art to have a universe inside it, but also do their best to bring their own self to it and not necessarily leave it at that. Over time, we're older. Am I older? I'm a little older. We're all a little bit older. We know, oh God, decades and decades of change, of performance, of this play, of Shakespeare plays, and of it is true, like the real good stuff, existing in so many different ways over time. You begin to get a sense that like, okay, maybe there is an infinity of processes built into these texts, but I never want that to be the point for my students to walk away with, because especially I think when you're a little younger, that can give you a kind of license to just say, oh, well, it doesn't matter. It matters, right? It does matter. But so I think in the case of Macbeth in particular, I think finding a place to put the horror of the play is a step towards dealing with the possible infinities of responses there.
Thank you.
Nathan, we're going to go to you in a sec, and you, Jill, but I want to barge in here for 1 second to say, for high school students, and maybe for college students, I don't know, but I can't talk about them, but for high school students, I mean, the whole thing about the Folger method, which is getting students connected to the language and then getting students inside the play and getting them to have some confidence about how to move around in this play, starting with the language. What we want kids to end up doing is to come up with their own, to see what's there and what's not there, and to come up with their own sense of what the play is. And sometimes that's a hard thing for teachers, because sometimes teachers come to the Folger and they say, we want to know the definitive interpretation of Hamlet, right? Or we want to know the definitive interpretation because that's what I want to teach my students. And there isn't any, which is one of the reasons that we like Adam's lecture so much. But also, what if we're teaching our students how to put those things together, right? And like between Adam, what you're saying, which is anything goes, and there's one way to interpret this. That's what we're after, I think, because that's really teaching students how to really do something. So I just want to heave that in there. Nathan, you go.
Okay, I'm on my phone, so let's see if this is working.
It's working. We're
hearing me out
seeing
there?
you and hearing you.
Okay, so I really have enjoyed in the past, but it might be kind of a mean trick on my students to put that line from Lady Macbeth, "Art thou afeared to be the same in thine own act and valor as thou art in desire," in front of students. In fact, I have it on a poster in my classroom, and have them respond to that. And what they want to say is, and they understand that language immediately, and they want to say, no, I'm not afraid to be the same in my actions as I am in my desires. And we talk about that. And then as they read the play, they generally get a kind of icky feeling about who this character is and what it might mean to be the same in your actions as you are in your own desires that you hold in your mind, or however you want to conceptualize that. But I wonder if Dr. Zucker, if that gets far enough away from the ambition. I mean, I want to say, I even still want to say with Lady Macbeth, no, I'm not afraid to be that person. Oh wait, then there's Macbeth. So I wonder what you think about that approach.
I think that's actually great. I think it's not a cruel trick. It's just a process trick where they kind of, oh, wait a second. And that's actually that's a big realization for adolescents, I think, to have. Oh, okay. it's cool to be brave and to like have a desire and ambition. Then wait, I have to kind of modify how that feeling enters the real world, obviously. Macbeth is a very exaggerated version of that point. And that's the reason why I get uneasy. He's not a model for anyone. I don't think he's supposed to be a site of like relatability in the way a lot of other Shakespeare characters are. Where you think, yeah, I can imagine that. Tragedy often winds up in a place where there's a breaking point with the character where you're like, yeah, of course, yes, it is hard, and yeah, and then suddenly you're like, why are you? No, that's the point of how that narrative process works. So I think it's actually an interesting exercise to do that with them, and then to say like, this is a type of play that's supposed to lead you along down this pathway that way. That moment of realization is something art, this particular kind of art, does. And I think you can have that whole conversation without using the word ambition on some level. I think using the word desire, using the word imagination, using the word, talking about like forward looking, like what do you're sort of circling around it a little bit, but once you put that sticker down, you're associating this play with a kind of an energy that you want a young person to have, and then that because shown to them as a disaster in some of them. So I actually like your approach as a way to get at some of what the play is doing to people and has done for centuries, without using that language of ambition. Yeah.
A couple of people have brought up Lady Macbeth.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, actually, Nathan, you brought up Lady Macbeth too, but Jill and Lisa have brought up Lady Macbeth and her own self, and also the relationship between the two of them. And Lisa focuses on expectations and toxicity of the relationship. Oh, wow. And Jill, you just said that you tend to focus on Lady Macbeth. So you want to share, will the two of you share a little bit about your Lady Macbeth stuff? We get her on here for a little bit.
Sure, I can share a little bit. I too, I started teaching it, focusing on ambition, because that's where we all start teaching it, right? And then I realized that didn't really make sense to me, because I don't really know whose ambition was it. Like we get caught up in who was really pushing that. And so then we start talking about, just all how they just keep spiraling together. They keep spiraling down and down and down and down. So, for teenagers, I just think they really relate to, relationships, and they've all had their problems and issues. So we just focus on that. And I find that draws them in, and they talk about more, and they just connect on a different level. I think personally, I think Lady Macbeth is more fascinating than Macbeth. So we kind of come in from that angle.
Jill, do you have a comment about her? About Lady Macbeth, not about Lisa.
I just was always intrigued by the way people tend to focus on her later in the play as going insane, and not as insane from the beginning, since she pushed this rather insane course of action at Macbeth.
That's really interesting. You got a comment on that, Adam?
I'm just going to say, like,
on her,
the one contemporary source, the slide I didn't show you was from Holinshed's Chronicles, the historical text that Shakespeare really just like lifted a huge chunk of the story from.
Yeah.
He did that with all of his history plays as well. This is one of his like big, I need to write a play. Let me flip through this book and see what's in there kind of books. That in that text, Lady Macbeth is cited for being deeply ambitious. Burning with an ambitious fury, I think, is the phrase that gets used to describe her. So even this source text uses her as a kind of energy source for that relationship. And I'm curious, Lisa, about again, it's that the mirroring of a teenage life in this play seems hard to me because of how bad it gets. Is this it's just distant enough for them from ordinary life to be kind of a safe space to project conversation about what a bad relationship might look like? I mean, do they get to a place where they're like, I never want to be like this, or oh yeah, I totally get it because
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the group. It depends on the group of students, but I can't remember the exact title of the song, but there's this song between Rihanna and I think I don't know who it is, where, they like the house on fire and, you keep taking me down, keep it down. So we mentioned this, all of a sudden I mentioned the songs and the kids start going wild. They start, dancing around the room, and I'm like, what the hell's going on here? But I think they recognize that they're not talking about chopping people's heads off, okay, or getting to that level. But I do think they recognize that relationships can go toxic, and you have certain expectations, and you could be pushed in the wrong direction. And they just kind of stay there. They don't really go to the blood part of it. But I'm fascinated by the idea of attacking it through blood. I think that would be a lot of fun.
There's such amazing language to use. I mean, this is another thing, like as we were doing this in the Shakespeare Institute together over that summer, I remember there was an exercise where everyone was trying to figure out a way to teach this play using just like 3 scenes. Which 3 scenes would you choose? And I watched people choose these scenes. I was like, there's no sense for this story of the play at all in these 3 scenes. But the pattern of the image set that was being chosen actually provided a kind of logic for how to get into the play in this particular straightforward way. And I think blood is actually one of those words and images that could get you in that way. Instead of through, well, here's the story of a guy whose wife tells him to kill somebody and let's see what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
There are some great comments in the chat box. First of all, Christina Rubio set us straight on the song that you were looking for, Lisa. And Ralph has some great comments. And Dave Peters, say out loud that how you've always seen the vaulting ambition line. Show yourself and say that, because it's really good.
Peggy, before we get to David, I just want to share Christina's question, since she put in the chat box earlier and she sent it to me. And
okay.
Make sure she gets her, because I love it. She said, I like to teach Macbeth as a serial killer because he goes on killing sprees, and she wants to know, does that sound too harsh? And if Christina, if you want to share more on that, please unmute and go ahead.
Excellent.
So yeah, I didn't think about it the first couple times that I read Macbeth with my students, but I think it was about the 3rd time around I read it with them. I thought about it and I was like, you know what? He's just going on a killing spree, and he sounds like the first serial killer that we kind of encounter early on in a play, or that I could remember at that time. And I just talked to my students, and they seem to really take to that idea, because once they saw like how he was provoked in a sense by Lady Macbeth, and then he kind of just let like something in him clicked, as they say sometimes happens with serial killers, that something just clicks after their first killing, that after that they just kind of go on a rampage. And so I just thought it was really interesting, and I love that my students really just kind of grasp that idea. I haven't taught Macbeth in a couple years, but from the last time I taught it, they really just enjoyed that idea and kind of went with it. And so now I'm thinking of reteaching it again next year, and I'm just thinking, is that still a good way to teach it, or am I too harsh with him?
I don't think that's too harsh at all. I think there's actually another interesting opportunity there to go from that to then say, okay, what happens when the person with absolute power over society is a serial killer? What does that world look like? You get a conversation of, like, because the play really is interested in those political questions. You have that long scene in Act 4 between Malcolm and Macduff, where they're just talking about what a good king is, et cetera. I mean, this is like one of the things at the heart of the play. So these ideas about toxicity within an intimate relationship, about someone snapping, about these images from our own lives of human beings who are kind of falling apart in one way or another. That I think the next step is, and this is a play about politics. This is a play about governance and rule. How do these interpersonal disasters fit into a story that wants us also to be thinking about that material? And that could get you to another place, I'm guessing. That's a guess.
I would say one of the sad things is that our students are really acquainted with, if not serial killers, massive killings. I mean, that is something that they know way too much about, which is the topic of another whole conversation. But so that makes sense. I would also say that we know, because we're talking to you guys a lot, is that we know that this winter, a lot of teachers have taught Macbeth who didn't plan to, because linking to what Adam's talking about government and about governance and how, you know, I don't know, I mean, the Folger's 2 blocks from the Capitol, and I live 7 blocks from the Capitol, and there, even before January 6th, you kind of felt like you were in Act 5 of Macbeth somehow, and you couldn't get out. So, and I evidently a lot of teachers thought that too, because there was some real synergy they felt between what was going on in the real world, and which is where I kind of got to from serial killers. Dave Peters, you're not getting out of this. I want you to talk about vaulting ambition, and then we're gonna thank Adam and say goodnight to everybody.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know. I don't really have much more to say, but I just what you're saying really resonated with me, because I always would struggle. I haven't taught Macbeth in years, but I would always struggle with that line, vaulting ambition, because it just seemed like he sort of tacked on the word ambition at the end of the speech, and it just never felt that was a thing he was motivated by. And I can never sort of picture that image in my mind of what does he vault, like, is it a vaulting horse, like one of those things that's sort of nailed to the ground in gymnastics that he's trying to get over, and sort of what that has to do with ambition never seemed really part of his character. When I would talk about Macbeth, I would always kind of think of it as like a tragedy about like just getting to a point in your life, and maybe this is just more my own age, my own background, of just thinking like, is this it? Like, is this all I'm ever going to do in my life? Like, it's sort of like a tragedy of middle age, I guess. Like, is this all I'm ever going to do, or is there one more thing that I should be doing? And I guess maybe that's ambition, but it never sort of felt much like ambition to me, and I never really talked about that much when I would teach the play.
I think you got to something very real in those lines.
Yeah.
You know, that is there's a reason why when you really dig into that moment, people have come up with nothing for centuries, and there are punctuation tricks that happen in editions to try to make it make more sense. The Folger actually puts a dash there to make it seem like he's interrupted in the middle of a sentence, that there was supposed to be something that would clarify it coming next, but the next person who enters made it so that we'll never know, which is a neat trick. But there's, if anything, there's sort of like an emptiness built into the concept itself in the way it's framed in the play. So yeah,
I mean, I like that. Like, I like what you said about that dash, because like he says, I have no spur to prick the sides of my tent, and then she walks in. I guess she sort of becomes that spur, right? Yeah. Lady Macbeth kind of does. Yeah. Yeah, that's really neat. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. There are some, you guys will have access to the recording of this, and also the chat box. There are some great comments in the chat box, and thanks for those, Ralph and Brianne. And Helen Henderson put in a link to this great article in McSweeney's that is exactly from what was going on in Washington in January and a little before. Adam Zucker, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys. Like I say, This is one of the things I enjoy most to do. I will say, if there are any Massachusetts humans who are here amongst us, that a colleague of mine and I are beginning to put together programming for the future for at UMass Boston and at UMass Amherst, not this summer, but the following summer, afternoons for secondary ed people to come in and chat with us and other faculty at the school. So I will keep Peggy in the loop for all of that. I hope you will all
We'll
stay
keep
connected
you.
with the Institute, and I'm really grateful. Shantae, Peggy, all of you, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, you guys. Be safe, be well, be healthy.
Hi,
Not that
Manny.
much longer.
Yeah, Manny, do you know Peggy already?
We
We
haven't
know
met
each other
yet.
on Twitter.